of purposiveness in general. If we wish to explain what purpose is, according to its transcendental determinations, without presupposing anything empirical like the feeling of pleasure, we say that the purpose is the object of a concept, insofar as the concept is regarded as the cause of the object, the real ground of its possibility, and the causality of a concept in respect of its object of its purposiveness, forma finalis. Where then not merely the cognition of an object, but the object itself, its form and existence, is thought as an effect only possible by means of the concept of this latter, there we think a purpose. The representation of the effect is here the determining ground of its cause and precedes it. The consciousness of the causality of a representation, for maintaining the subject in the same state, may here generally denote what we call pleasure, while on the other hand, pain is that representation which contains the ground of the determination of the state of representations into their opposite, of restraining or removing them. The faculty of desire, so far as it is determinable to act only through concepts, i.e., in conformity with the representation of a purpose, would be the will, but an object, or a state of mind, or even an action, is called purposive, although its possibility does not necessarily presuppose the representation of a purpose, merely because its possibility can be explained and conceived by us only so far as we assume for its ground a causality according to purposes, i.e., in accordance with a will which has regulated it according to the representation of a certain rule. There can be, then, purposiveness without purpose, so far as we do not place the cause of this form in a will, but yet can only make the explanation of its possibility intelligible to ourselves by deriving it from a will. Again, we are not always forced to regard what we observe, in respect of its possibility, from the point of view of reason. Thus, we can at least observe a purposiveness according to form, without basing it on a purpose, as the material of the nexus finalis, and remark in it objects, although only by reflection. 11. The judgment of taste has nothing at its basis but the form of the purposiveness of an object or of its mode of representation. Every purpose, if it be regarded as a ground of satisfaction, always carries with it an interest, as the determining ground of the judgment about the object of pleasure. Therefore, no subjective purpose can lie at the basis of the judgment of taste, but also the judgment of taste can be determined by no representation of an objective purpose, i.e., of the possibility of the object itself in accordance with principles of purposive combination, and consequently by no concept of the good, because it is an aesthetical and not a cognitive judgment. It therefore has to do with no concept of the character and internal or external possibility of the object by means of this or that cause, but merely with the relation of the representative powers to one another, so far as they are determined by a representation. Now, this relation, in the determination of an object as beautiful, is bound up with the feeling of pleasure, which is declared by the judgment of taste to be valid for everyone. Hence, pleasantness, merely accompanying the representation, can as little contain the determining ground of the judgment as the representation of the perfection of the object and the concept of the good can. Therefore, it can be nothing else than the subjective purposiveness in the representation of an object without any purpose, either objective or subjective, and thus it is the mere form of purposiveness in the representation by which an object is given to us, so far as we are conscious of it, which constitutes the satisfaction that we, without a concept, judge to be universally communicable. and consequently, this is the determining ground of the judgment of taste. 12. The judgment of taste rests on a priori grounds. To establish a priori the connection of the feeling of a pleasure or a pain as an effect without any representation whatever, sensation or concept, as its cause, is absolutely impossible. For that would be a particular causal relation which, with objects of experience, can always only be cognized a posteriori and through the medium of experience itself. We actually have, indeed, in the Critique of Practical Reason, derived from universal moral concepts a priori the feeling of respect as a special and peculiar modification of feeling which will not strictly correspond either to the pleasure or the pain that we get from empirical objects. But there we could go beyond the bounds of experience and call in a causality which rested on a supersensible attribute of the subject, viz., freedom. And even there, properly speaking, it was not this feeling which we derived from the idea of the moral as cause, but merely the determination of the will. But the state of mind which accompanies any determination of the will is in itself a feeling of pleasure and identical with it, and therefore does not follow the moral as a good precede therefore does not follow from it as its effect. This last must only be assumed if the concept of the moral as a good precede the determination of the will by the law, for in that case the pleasure that is bound up with the concept could not be derived from it as from a mere cognition. Now, the case is similar with the pleasure in aesthetic judgments, only that here it is merely contemplative and does not bring about an interest in the object, whilst on the other hand, in the moral judgment, it is practical. The consciousness of the mere formal purposiveness in the play of the subject's cognitive powers in a representation through which an object is given is the pleasure itself, because it contains a determining ground of the activity of the subject in respect of the excitement of its cognitive powers, and therefore an inner causality, which is purposive, in respect of cognition in general, without, however, being limited to any definite cognition, and consequently contains a mere form of the subjective purposiveness of a representation in an aesthetical judgment. This pleasure is in no way practical, neither like that arising from the pathological ground of pleasantness, nor that from the intellectual ground of the presented good. But yet it involves causality, viz., of maintaining without further design the state of the representation itself and the occupation of the cognitive powers. We linger over the contemplation of the beautiful, because this contemplation strengthens and reproduces itself, which is analogous to, though not of the same kind as, that lingering which takes place when a physical charm in the representation of the object repeatedly arouses the attention, the mind being passive. 13. The pure judgment of taste is independent of charm and emotion. Every interest spoils the judgment of taste and takes from it impartiality, especially if the purposiveness is not, as with the interest of reason, placed before the feeling of pleasure but grounded on it. This last always happens in an aesthetical judgment upon anything so far as it gratifies or grieves us. Hence, judgment so affected can lay no claim at all to a universally valid satisfaction, or at least so much the less claim, in proportion as there are sensations of this sort among the determining grounds of taste. That taste is always barbaric, which needs a mixture of charms and emotions in order that there may be satisfaction, and still more so if it make these the measure of its ascent. Nevertheless, charms are often not only taken account of in the case of beauty, which, properly speaking, ought merely to be concerned with form, as contributory to the aesthetical universal satisfaction, but they are passed off as in themselves beauties, and thus the matter of satisfaction is substituted for the form. This misconception, however, which, like so many others, has something true at its basis, may be removed by a careful determination of these concepts. A judgment of taste on which charm and emotion have no influence, although they may be bound up with the satisfaction in the beautiful, which therefore has as its determining ground merely the purposiveness of the form, is a pure judgment of taste.